Hello, everyone. Big news in the past couple of weeks. We have a new food pyramid. It is inverted. And to break things down for us, tell us what this means for our diet, we have Dr. Dansinger, who's here. He has weekly office hours every week. Make sure that you do like this video, subscribe to the channel to get notified every time he has office hours because it's every Monday and he answers your questions when you show up, when you're here, when you're present, when you're willing to do the work to improve your diet and ultimately improve your circulation. You can go to youtube.com/, the @ sign Michael Dansinger MD, subscribe to his channel, and also youtube.com/, the @ sign the way to my heart. But of course, he's available to help you with your diabetes reversal if you have Medicare or Medicare PPO plans in New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Virginia, and Florida. Go to diabetesreversalpartners.com to learn more. And I did send a patient your way in the past week. I'm hoping that they did reach out because they can definitely use some help. And they were wondering if you took other insurance as well in New Hampshire in particular. So crossing our fingers that you do, maybe.
It's just Medicare and Medicare Advantage PPO right now.
You can only do so much for the moment, but at least you have those. And there are a lot of people that fit that bill and have that access. So definitely give them a call. But, I'm sure that you're starting to work off of this new pyramid, as you guide patients. What were your initial thoughts when you saw the new pyramid, this inverted pyramid, something that we've seen pretty much as far back as I can remember my entire life?
Yeah, great topic. Thanks for asking. I'm excited to talk about, the latest um, messaging to American citizens and the world.
The
So,
office hours every week makes.
you know, I have been concerned about the government's dietary advice for so many years, and we might remember the previous USDA food pyramid that had a lot of starch at the base, and it really encouraged a lot of starch intake, and it really didn't distinguish very much between refined starch and sugar versus all sources of starch and sugar. And then that became very controversial in the around the year 2000, and the Atkins diet was on fire, and it was a complete turnaround of the food pyramid. And Atkins said we should have meat and fat at the base and starch at the very tippy top. And I actually did a clinical trial to compare two versions of the food pyramid back in the early 2000s, and um, you know had a hard time getting people to eat in a way that was less starchy, and it ruined the clinical trial. And we've had different iterations of the advice, and now we have a long awaited new food pyramid, which is totally inverted. And I think Dr. Adkins would be very pleased and proud to have seen this new version of the food pyramid. But it's consistent now with what we have been saying, you and I, Kim, where we've really encouraged people to eat healthy proteins and vegetables and a moderate amount of fruit, and to back way off on the refined starch and sugar. And that messaging that we have been talking about based on the science is really quite compatible with the new pyramid. And so, is the new pyramid perfect? No. I think there's very few people who um, could say that it's perfect as is, but I'm going to give it an A minus, which I think
Okay.
is the better grade than I've been able to give the government's dietary advice uh, ever since I got into the nutrition game 25 years ago. So
And
that's
this
my
is literally
summary.
politics aside. And I wish so many of the articles would just put politics aside and just start focusing on health and taking each decision as it comes because I'm so tired of the headlines, Dr. Danzinger, saying meat is now the focus of the diet. And it's not focusing on meat. it's focusing on protein. And I just had this conversation with a doctor you're very familiar with, Dr. John Phillips, who co-hosts the Heart of Innovation with me on a weekly basis. And he's even looking at developing a protein bar because he finds that so many of his patients are under, how do you phrase it, they don't get enough protein. And this pyramid, he thinks, is really going to help. That protein is critical for our body's function, which I would love for you to explain. Because we have so many patients as well with wounds. And I think this is the clearest indication that you have that when a patient has a wound on their foot, they're sent to a nutritionist or a dietitian, and they're offered, dietary guidance to increase their protein to increase wound healing. And there's even a product, a drink by Abbott, that the podiatrists, a lot of them suggest, and a lot of our patients have been given in the hospital, that increases the protein. It's almost like Ensure, but it is directly clinically geared towards and formulated for people with wounds. So, can you break that down for us? Why does protein matter, and what's going on in our society with so many people not getting enough protein?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so um, I have been an advocate of healthy dietary protein throughout my entire career, and this food pyramid really does um, increase the protein, and for good reasons. It at the same time that it emphasizes protein, it emphasizes vegetables and whole foods. So this is really a whole foods pyramid, and eating real food is the real focus. So among those real foods are protein foods. And so, my favorite healthy protein is fish and seafood. And another healthy protein is tofu, and vegetarian proteins from nuts, and from low fat dairy, which we can talk more about, and lean red meats like poultry, well, lean poultry, but also lean red meats like pork and lean beef. So protein is important in many ways. First of all, it's very satiating. So it tells, the hormones in the body that you've just had a good meal, and it's the opposite of appetite stimulating, like starch and sugar are appetite stimulating. So protein helps turn on satiety hormones. It's good for that. Our bodies are made mostly of protein, and so for strong muscles and bones and organ health, protein is good. A drawback of the protein is it is possible to have too much protein. It's possible to have unhealthy protein that's too high in saturated fat. But the government, I think, is doing us a favor by saying that healthy sources of protein can help our health, and I agree with that. There's some nuance that we can talk about, but the general message here is whole foods, including healthy protein sources.
And it's not about saying, okay, go for that carnivore diet. That is not what it's saying. If you really look at that pyramid, it is showing a variety. It's showing you need to do what Dr. Dansinger has been saying all along, which is shop the perimeter of the supermarket. The whole foods are best. And we've talked about this a number of times. If you are going to choose regular meat, if you are going to choose beef, make sure it's in moderation. Make sure, what's the guide that you would have for people eating meat, aside from the fact that it should be grass fed, grass finished, um, in terms of the portion size per meal?
Yeah, great question. So I favor the palm method when it comes to protein servings. And so if you look at the size of your palm, ignoring the fingers, if you look at the diameter and the thickness of your palm, that's a pretty good guide for what a protein portion should be. And so you can imagine, a piece of chicken breast or a piece of fish, that's about the diameter and thickness of your palm. Bigger people have bigger palms, and that's consistent with this dietary advice. Smaller people, can do fine with smaller protein choices. I don't want people to be skimpy with their healthy proteins. Eat a portion that's going to be satisfying, but always pair your protein with vegetables if you can.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I really like about this pyramid is it's saying protein and vegetables and fruit go hand in hand, and they're like almost like twins on this food pyramid. It's not one higher than the other. It's very clear that they go together, um, almost at every almost at every meal. What you can do with this pyramid, which you could not do before, is you can you can look at the pyramid, and if your shopping cart matches what's in the food pyramid in new pyramid in spirit, if your shopping cart was filled with the fruits and vegetables and the healthy protein options that is shown on this pyramid, then and if your kitchen reflects what's in there, that's the first time you've actually been able to do that in a way that I think is more literal than what we've been able to do before. So another thing I like about it.
And I think if you look at it, your cupboards should almost be empty with your refrigerator and your freezer full.
Yes, absolutely. So so there's not a lot of right, there's not a lot of shelf stable things on this pyramid because it's whole foods that are not specifically designed to last for years. And so, yes, there's canned vegetables and frozen vegetables, yes, and of course, healthy proteins like fish can do very well, in a frozen form. And but there's not a lot of pantry stuff here, and uh, that's because a lot of the stuff in the pantry is starch. Most of the stuff and this food pyramid has put starchy food at at the bottom, and it's the least important. And I'm excited about that. It's definitely a point of criticism because there are many different eating strategies, and some very good eating strategies have a lot of whole grains. But the problem in the United States is, and in the rest of the world, is companies have taken the idea that we can eat a lot of whole grains and has abused that and turned it into a lot of refined grains with marketing terms that make you think that they're so healthy. But I welcome this new change that really demotes starchy foods and says you can have it in moderation, but it should be whole, and do not eat refined sugar and starch.
And one of those marketing ploys is the word enriched flour. And that was the downfall for me when it came to grains because I can no longer eat bread since I do have that MTHFR mutation and my body can't process it properly. And so I end up with my B vitamins not absorbing and the enzyme in your arteries that's supposed to be broken down in that whole process. And it's like nails on the artery walls. And so for me, I mean, this is good news because for so long I was thinking, oh my goodness, I need to be following the Dean Ornish heart disease prevention diet or heart disease reversal diet or the Estelin diet. And they're really, really big into the whole grains in every meal. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to prevent heart disease, which runs in my family, if I can't eat these whole grains and a lot of them? Now, honestly, I feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm breathing a sigh of relief. Should I be?
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned MTHFR mutation, which has to do with folate metabolism, and for some people, they just can't. They have limited MTHFR enzyme activity, which does interfere with folate metabolism, and some people just take methylated folate to compensate with that. For most people, the problem with starchy foods is, and in America, about probably 80% of the starchy food that we eat is refined, not consistent with any of the the food pyramid, even the past ones. But for many people, whole grains are an important component of a healthy eating pattern. And so I don't want to, I'm going to point out that's one of the major sources of criticism from mainstream nutrition experts, is that whole grains have been appear to be seriously demoted. And um, but that's because it's been so terribly abused, and very few of the grains people are eating are truly whole. And um, if if you're I think for people with peripheral artery disease, it's very important to think about the healthiest versus the least healthy sources of fat, which can be confusing with this new pyramid.
Mhm. Okay, let's go through some of those again. You mentioned wild salmon, wild shrimp, which if you come out to the San Francisco Bay Area, I found a restaurant I think that you would like. It's called Lotus and it's in San Rafael. And I was talking to the owner because my dad went and I went there for the very first time on Saturday night to try it because they use their own ghee. They actually make the ghee themselves for cooking. They use avocado oil. All of their vegetables are pesticide free, and they promote that. All of their meats, grass fed, grass finished, specially sourced. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is pretty incredible because a lot of times we end up cheating and not getting the right oils, especially the healthy fats. When you go out to a restaurant, a lot of times you end up with the, seed oils and other cheaper oils that may wreak havoc on your arteries.
So the healthiest fats are coming from olives and avocados. And so olive oil comes in various qualities, but olive oil is still terrific. It's prominent in the new food pyramid. Avocado is another healthy fat, a healthy oil. Nuts
Mhm.
are another really important source of healthy fats. And so this food pyramid is promoting nuts in moderation, not too much, but fish. Fish, for example, from salmon, wild salmon, um, and other fish and shellfish, sardines, anchovies,
Mhm.
etc. These are remain very important sources, underutilized sources, and the expense is definitely a limiting factor. But I would have liked to seen fish right at the top of this food pyramid, where the
Mhm.
meat and the chicken live. I would have liked to seen more fish, and it's a shame about the price of fish, but I would have liked to seen fish even higher than red meat and cheese and poultry. But those are those are, if you were in the if you were a cow, you would be nervous, and if you were a seller of beef, there's some funny cartoons out there. If you were a seller of beef, you would be very excited by this new food pyramid. But most of us nutrition experts worry about the fat in beef and poultry and other animals.
I was just going to say, so poultry. So we had someone that wrote in and said, I don't understand why Dr. Michael Dansinger doesn't like chicken. I literally eat it for every single meal because I was under the impression that it was a healthy protein.
Oh yeah, chicken is healthy, but chicken fat is not. And beef is healthy, but beef fat is not. And so the solution to that is not to get fooled, right? Let's not get fooled and be unsophisticated about animal fat from meat and dairy. Fat from meat and dairy is not healthy. It clogs the arteries. There's really no question about that. The science is very clear about that. But that does not mean that chicken can't be eaten. That does not mean that beef cannot be eaten, but you want lean sources of those. Now, when it comes to dairy products, there's a lot of debate among experts about whether low fat is better than than full fat.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be able to settle that in the next few years. My view is that the science favors the low fat versions of these foods, but when it comes to fermented dairy products like yogurt and cheese, there's you know there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we have that those aren't as bad and might have some health benefits. And so, cheese in moderation. Yogurt is definitely a healthy food, but I still favor a low fat version of Greek yogurt because dairy fat um, clearly um, raises LDL cholesterol, which clogs arteries.
Yeah, because we also have Nancy that is saying, do you prefer European cheeses over American cheeses with rennet, which is a critical part of creating cheese, being so prevalently, she says prevalently, if I could say it,
Uh,
genetically modified. Pfizer provides that to a bunch of different cheese companies out there, and it's prevalent in the American cheese versus the European cheese. What would be your preference? Or does it even matter?
Yeah, when it comes to the rennet, there's I think there's a small amount of that enzyme in the that is necessary for traditional cheese making. There's alternatives to rennet. Um, we're a little bit out of my expertise now when it comes to
Mhm.
rennet, but from a health standpoint, I don't think the rennet is particularly relevant to health concerns. Um, Compared to you know other aspects of cheese, which is a complex mixture, and so I worry a lot about the animal fat in cheese. And just as a reminder that in the 1950s in the Nordic countries like Finland, Switzerland, Iceland, heart disease was rampant there, even among non-smokers, and that was because of all the fat in the butter and the cheese and the meat that people were eating there. It was a totally natural diet that would be consistent with this food pyramid, but heart disease was rampant despite the fact that they were eating plenty of fish and getting plenty of exercise, and there was hardly any obesity. It was because of all the animal fat. And so that's my number one complaint with this new pyramid is I think it was careless about the animal fat.
Uh, my dad had just slipped me a note and asked, has two questions for you. And one is in regards to dairy. His dietitian told him that he needed to lay off the dairy because it causes inflammation in his arteries. But she said that eating Parmesan cheese and other aged cheeses was actually okay. It's interesting because the pyramid does put a heavy emphasis on dairy.
Yeah, so cheese is complicated. There's a lot of different types of cheese. What I like about cheese is the protein. I like that it's fermented, and different types of cheese has different fat content. And so, is dairy inflammatory? Some experts will argue that, but I think in moderation, using it as a condiment, including Parmesan. Parmesan makes a very nice condiment, adds a lot of flavor, and if you do it just very thinly shaved or very grated, it can add a lot of flavor without a lot of calories and fat. And so, um,
And I try to use it as well. I'm anaphylactic to dairy, and I'm not, though, to aged cheese like Parmesan. And I'm told I need to get a bunch of calcium in my diet every day. And I'm thinking that is a way to do it if I can get the Parmesan at least as part of it to supplement my big push, my big spinach push every single day.
so dairy does have calcium. Calcium's important. You want to get your calcium from diet for sure, and so I favor for that low fat dairy products, but also greens. We haven't talked enough about how important the vegetables are to this food pyramid. So beans are still in, and greens, which are also a good source of calcium.
Yeah, and we should weigh heavily.
Yeah,
We didn't talk a lot about it, but that probably is the most important, which is to say, I mean, I wish that they were literally streamed right across the top with, big bushels of spinach and everything just right there above where the steak was placed and the chicken was placed.
so there's many ways that one can design a pyramid. I do think that a pyramid shape is a very effective way to convey a hierarchy of what's healthy. And I actually like the idea of having a pyramid where the most important things at the top rather than at the bottom. And so an inverted pyramid, I do think, is a very good shape to convey. So you can argue that this food pyramid is uh, better than previous, but still flawed, and that there's lots of different ways one could fill a pyramid, and there's no short of controversy. But the most important message of this pyramid is that we should be eating single ingredient foods. And I think all nutrition experts across the political spectrum can agree with that idea.
Yeah, and the second question my dad had was in regards to ghee versus grass-fed, grass-finished butter, because the restaurant we went to was making a big deal about making their own ghee. Talk about what ghee is and if it is a good choice.
Sure. Okay, so ghee is clarified butter. It's used prominently in Indian cuisine, and so it removes the solids from the butter that could otherwise burn. And so um, I do not favor ghee or butter as a cooking fat because it has a lot of saturated fat in that, which clogs arteries. Again, is one of the leading causes of the rampant atherosclerosis and premature heart disease in Nordic countries in the 1950s. And so I favor olive oil or avocado oil. Butter can be used as a condiment. It adds a lot of flavor, and so that's how I would recommend using it. So ghee is clarified butter, and um, I have a lot of mixed feelings about it.
Okay, last final thoughts here. Can you just summarize what are the takeaways for this food pyramid? And I want to invite people to write in questions because I think that this is not a one-parter. I think that we need part two. Let everyone digest what you have said, and then we'll follow up with additional questions next week from those who view it because so many in our network with Global PAD Association follow you and they always seem to have questions after they viewed it. They may not be able to join live, but they always view it afterwards and have additional questions. So next week we'll do a little bit more of the same and get to your questions aside from just mine. But Dr. Dansinger, final thoughts here. What are the takeaways as we close out?
Sure, this new dietary advice is really all about let's let's be very, very, very concerned about ultra processed food. That's what's driving these epidemics of food related disease. And instead, let's get very serious about eating single ingredient whole foods and making our meals out of that. Vegetables, number one, most important. Fruits and vegetables should be paired, combined with healthy protein sources, and that's what we should mainly be eating. We should still be eating whole grains, but in moderation. And what we should be very cautious about is ultra refined sources of sugar and starch and all these processed foods that are coming in wrappers and you know bottles and things made in factories. That's what's fueling PAD and heart disease and diabetes. And if we could just stick to fruits and vegetables, proteins, and moderate amounts of whole grains, that things in the United States and in the world could really take a radically um, uh, optimistic turn for the better. And so, yes, let's embrace the new food pyramid, recognizing its strengths and being a little bit forgiving about its weaknesses. And let's move forward to better health in the United States.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Dansinger. This is a weekly series with Dr. Michael Dansinger. It's called Ask Dr. Dansinger. So make sure you do like this video, subscribe to our channels for more great content like this, and get notified when we have office hours with Dr. Dansinger so we can get your questions answered. It's youtube.com/the @ Michael Dansinger MD, also youtube.com/ the @ the way to my heart. And of course, if you are in New Hampshire or Massachusetts or New York, Minnesota, Virginia, or Florida, and you have Medicare or Medicare PPO plans, definitely go to diabetesreversalpartners.com and check into Dr. Dansinger's personalized diabetes reversal services. But we will see you here next week. Make sure if you do have questions about the pyramid, next week we are going to get to your questions. So put them in comments. Email us at info@padhelp.org. Get your questions to us, and we will have Dr. Dansinger ask them or answer them